dish and the moment that made you fall in love with food?
Well, I hope this doesn't duplicate too much what Chuck is going to say, but I remember it being, I was already a food writer, but I was taking it more from sort of an academic approach, something to fill a job. But I was sitting in a barbecue trailer, John Miller's trailer back in Austin, J. Miller Barbecue, and I was having a piece of fatty brisket. And I'd never had fatty brisket like that before. I came from that school of thought back in the day when mom or dad took the back of a knife and slid all of the fat off of a brisket and fed it to the dog, and then soaked the rest in barbecue sauce. So this was the first time as an adult when I was stuffing my face with fatty brisket, and it brought that sort of, I don't know, that feeling of false security and euphoria that you get from food sometimes, especially from fat. And I think it's sort of a primal reaction to that kind of food. And that was the moment that I thought, you know what, this is really what I need to be doing for a living.
Awesome. Chuck, why don't you finish? What was the moment that made you fall in love with food?
Well, I mean, yeah, I could go that direction too, but for me, it was always, I grew up in Iowa, as you can see the pennant behind me, I had that quintessential country grandma, who would sit there and stew pork chops and gravy on the stovetop for like 2-3 hours over the course of an afternoon. And so you'd have that dinner with the butter soaked mashed potatoes, soaked with the pork chops and the gravy and all that stuff. And that was always just, something you look forward to just about every week. But I've lived in Texas for 20 years though. And obviously the smoke kick has really hit into where it's, I look at any type of piece of protein and I'm like, how do I smoke this? How do I grill this? Things like that. So that's really kind of where it all continued. But to go back to the roots, it was always, Sunday afternoons at grandma's house having lunch or they would call it dinner, even though it was at 2 p.m. That was really the highlight.
Yeah, I think grandmas have a big influence on a lot of us. Paul, what about you?
I swear I'm just as much of a carnivore as my colleagues here, but for me, it's coming out of the garden. I grew up as a kid with a huge garden in an extra lot next to my house, and mom put the three of us, my brother and sister and I, to work as indentured servants canning all these tomatoes. So it's the perfect ripe summer tomato coming out of the garden at probably 5, 6, 7 years old, and that's for me. It doesn't get much better. I like things simple, and nothing's better than a summer tomato.
Okay, you guys are going to make me sound like a total snob with my story. But okay, so I'm Mexican. I've always loved food, and food has always been a really huge part of my life and how we show affection for those we love. But the thing that made me really fall in love with and maybe see the possibilities of kind of food as art was a meal I had several years ago in New York at Wiley Dufresne's WD50. And it was specifically, I think, the third course. I've got the menu framed in my kitchen as art, but it's the third course. And it was, his restaurant's all about molecular gastronomy and making things taste like things that they don't look like. And so there was, it looked like a little piece of chocolate candy, but when you cut into it, it was foie gras with a passion fruit sauce. And I wept when I put this in my mouth, and I almost started sobbing. It was almost really embarrassing. As it was only minorly embarrassing. And I hope if Wiley was looking, because I did see him in the kitchen, that he was just really flattered by my reaction. But that was a dish that really just made me see, oh my God, the possibilities with food are kind of endless, and this can actually be an art form beyond just nourishment, which is also really important. Okay. What was the worst thing that you have ever put in your mouth? And I want to clarify that I am only talking about food or drink here. Mike.
Oh man, San Antonio's not going to like this answer, but it was just a couple of weeks after I started in San Antonio in 2016, and a friend of mine and I went to Luke, that popular former now closed restaurant on the Riverwalk. And I'd been there when it first opened, and it was terrific. So it was sort of like, okay, this is going to be my first review in San Antonio. You know, come out of the gate with something strong, show people that I know how to praise and properly put food in context. And I'll be damned if we didn't get a batch of spoiled oysters. And so I popped that first one in my mouth, and it was like, oh no, it's in my mouth. So I had to reach up, and just a reflex reaction, got it out of my mouth. I've gotten very good at that over the years. But I have to say, my colleague did not have the same speed I did. He swallowed a couple of them before I was like, dude, these are bad. These have gone way bad. And he got food poisoning that night. I didn't, because I had the wherewithal to take that out. That was my first review in San Antonio. Half star. I would have gone 0, but I was talked up 2.5. And so that became the cuddly teddy bear image that I've cultivated ever since.
Chuck, what's yours?
Well, I'm gonna go a 2-4 here. First off, let's just say that nobody at a bar should ever be drinking Jägermeister. That's just bad, nasty stuff. All right, but to go more on food.
Okay, but didn't most of us learn that in college?
Yes, but that doesn't stop people from occasionally buying you one if you're bellied up.
Okay.
Let's go to the main more controversial one, which you and Mike tried to grill me on. Just pancakes in general. Let's get rid of them. They're horrible. You feel horrible after you eat them. The syrup, the batter, they're just not good. And I don't ever want to eat another pancake for the rest of my life if I can avoid it. And they're the devil's breakfast is what I like to call them.
Okay, just to clarify, so if someone buys you a Jaeger shot, you'll down that. But if someone buys you pancakes, forget it, man.
Yes, we have to have standards here. Yes, but yeah, you have to be polite. I mean, I'm not going to get a complimentary pancake served at me, in the diner line. But let's just, I mean,
I think you might now.
Can we admit that pancakes are horrible? I mean, come on, they're horrible food. Yeah, that.
Okay, be careful or we're going to mute you next. All right, Paul, what's yours?
Chuck, man, that's a heck of a hill to die on, brother. For me, I've been doing this for decades at this point, and I've tried a little bit of everything from basically every culinary tradition around the world. And honestly, there's not much that I don't like. The only thing today that I will consciously avoid and refuse to actually qualify as a foodstuff is bananas. It's just not food.
I feel like that's a similar hill to pancakes, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, all right, so the worst, huh? Go ahead.
Everybody's taste is different.
That is true. That is true. And that will become really apparent with mine. The worst thing I've ever put into my mouth is uni, which is sea urchin and is considered such a delicacy, and it's crazy expensive. And it was at a very fancy restaurant in San Francisco. And it was the first time I had it. And I almost didn't get it down. Like it hadn't gone bad. It just was a flavor of like putrid liver that I just could not handle. It was just so not my jam at all. And I really struggled with not spitting it out and maybe what I'd previously eaten at the table at this like super fancy place. And I got it down, but man, I had to chug a little bit of wine to get that flavor out of my mouth to be able to enjoy the next course. That was just horrible. And I'm sorry for any restaurateurs and fans of uni. I know that it's indicative of a very peasant palate on my part, but I just could not handle that. All right. What animal would you not be able to eat?
You want me to start?
Yes, please do.
Okay, well, I'm going to say that any animal that's big enough, bad enough, and carnivorous enough to eat me first, I'm not going to eat that animal because I'm guessing that the food chain didn't want it that way. It's a law of nature, and by God, I obey the law. And I'm saying that as somebody who has eaten durian fruit and made blood sausage.
So
Wow.
no bear.
Yeah, yeah, we can stay away from the bear. We can stay away from the great white shark.
All right. We'll see when the next bear/shark restaurant opens in San Antonio, and you have to go review it. How
I'm
pure
sure
your
it's coming in early 2021.
Okay. Chuck,
Yeah.
what about you?
Well, to channel Vincent Vega from Pulp Fiction, I cannot eat duck because duck has personality. They're cute. They quack. They, the nice regal head, of a green mallard duck. I just find them charming and, fully understanding of where our food sources come from and everything. But, I'm going to go the chicken route. Chicken, I think, tastes a little bit better than duck anyways. But, I generally feel bad eating duck. Just because of I find them interesting. They swim, they flock, they chirp, they talk. They're just. I look at them more as pets. So that's almost on the level of eating the family dog, in my opinion.
I get it. Okay, Paul.
Yeah.
Chuck, you already went there, man. The top of my list is obviously my puppies, but
I feel like that goes without saying.
you said what animal, but okay.
That's true. That's true. I did. Yeah.
More to the point, I spent 15 years living at the beach in North Carolina and spent a lot of time in the water. And surf and beach bum culture out there, you've got this mutual understanding with sharks specifically. We don't eat you, you don't eat us. It's an understanding. It doesn't always work, but there's a little juju to it that people who spend a lot of time in the water kind of take seriously. So for me, I'm not a big fan to begin with, but yeah, I will never eat a shark again.
Oh, shark is delicious. Okay, the animal though that I actually have never tasted and would not be able to eat, dogs notwithstanding, because I feel again like that kind of goes without saying, are rabbits. I used to raise them with my family, and they literally were pets for me. And just knowing their wonderful, sweet little personalities and how unique each one was to the other and how developed their personalities were, which I guess you could say about any animal if you got to know them well enough. And yet I still love meat. But yeah, rabbit is a thing that for me, I can't do. I used to hypnotize them, for God's sakes. I mean, you can't eat an animal that you know how to hypnotize. I think like that's one of the basic rules of food, right? Okay, maybe that's just me in my head. It's a weird place in there. Okay. Speaking of weird, Mike, let's start with you with this question. How do you order your steak?
Do we really have to get into this?
Are we gonna do that?
Oh, we're doing it. It's going down. What, Mike, come on, fess up.
I like to be difficult, and so I order it mid-rare, which is somewhere between rare and medium rare. And it's kind of just to be high maintenance, but it's also to see if the grill is paying attention. Sometimes rare and medium rare don't mean the same things to the same people. And sometimes rare can come out way too close to raw. But at the same time, medium rare can come out too close to medium. So I do mid-rare, just to be a pain in the butt, among other things.
I'm glad that you own it and you're just going with it. Like, no apologies. Yes. Chuck, what about you?
Well, I don't think I'm going to say anything that's going to go against the grain here, but I am a medium rare guy also, generally. Rare, like Mike said, is way too close to raw. But I want to throw something else out there, in that, obviously there are a lot of well done people out there, and I don't eat my steak that way. But the steaks that have been cooked like that, I'm not turning them away. I mean, I'm still eating them, and that's what we ate as children. So I'm still kind of open to all of the ranges if you really want to go that way. But medium rare for me is still, obviously when you got that really nice choice piece of meat, that's what you want. But if you got a really thin steak, there's almost no way around well done. If you just, a real quick minute or two on either side of the grill, and there's no way around it, and nobody's going to turn away the meat and say, I'm not going to eat that. So that's kind of my philosophy on it.
Well, certainly if it's free, but if you're paying for it, you might have a different opinion.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. If I'm paying, you know, $50 on up to 100 or whatever for a steak, you know, medium rare is definitely where I want it for sure. Yeah.
Okay, Paul, what about you?
This is kind of a regional question for me. I grew up south of Pittsburgh, and they've kind of got their own tradition up there called a Pittsburgh Rare, or sometimes it's like so. The legend is that steel workers on their lunch break would throw a slab of meat against the molten pots of steel, and just get a quick tear. But essentially, how it works up there, where they really know how to do it, is it's this almost hard black char on both sides with a pretty rare steak inside. In the rest of the country, when I'm not feeling nostalgic and wanting something that feels like from home, I'm your boring medium rare guy. Like,
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Well, I do have one thing to add though. One thing that if you haven't done it, and it's magnificent, I've done this in a food chat column before. Toss those steaks directly on the coals, and they used to call it an Eisenhower steak. Dwight Eisenhower used to cook for his aides with that, the president, and they also call it a dirty steak, things like that. Unbelievable steak. If you haven't tried it, it takes a little bit of guts to do it, but great results doing it that way too.
Yeah, I was actually at the food shack the day that you did that caveman cooking column on putting them directly onto the hot coals. And I was expecting to take in a bunch of ash and charcoal, but no, not at all. It doesn't really adhere to the meat. It was really good.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm also a medium rare girl, and man, I grew up eating just shoe leather. And to this day, sorry, Mom, if you're watching this, but when I go over to my mom's house to eat and she makes meat, I mean, it's just like how crunchy and hard could this be? She prefers it to be carcinogenic in the amount of charcoal that it actually acquires from cooking for so long. And that is enough for me. Okay, so now we're going to get into some more serious questions. And the first one I'm going to direct at you, Mike. The pandemic has had several different layers of impact on our coverage, but one of, I think, the most notable that you've really been feeling the brunt of is that we have decided to stop doing restaurant reviews until restaurants are able to open fully at 100% capacity. And this is an issue that you and I talked, and we went back and forth on it a lot before making this final decision. Could you walk through that decision-making process for the folks in the audience and help explain why we made that decision that we did?
Oh, yeah, sure. This will be interactive between the two of us because we both had so many thoughts about it. I see the role of a restaurant review as something to build a comparative base with. And if you're reviewing restaurants across the spectrum of a city, and not necessarily saying a restaurant is 4 stars only because it has white tablecloths and multi-courses and foie gras and things like that, but it's a comparative system of value and execution within what they're trying to do, we try to establish a baseline with that so that you can compare the quality of restaurants. If you don't have time to dig into our rationale behind it, you can just look at the stars. Now, that depends, that's reliant on going to a lot of restaurants over a period of time. And we built up a database like that, not only of in print and online, but experiential kind of referencing. Now, if we were to look at restaurants now, we really wouldn't be establishing any kind of a reliable baseline because the pandemic has changed the way restaurants do business, at least for right now, if not going into the foreseeable future. So right now, I think those ratings would not be reliable against past experiences, so they wouldn't mean nearly as much. It's almost like if we're going to do restaurant reviews, we almost have to come up with a whole new system of evaluating those, taking into, it's almost like a golfer's handicap or something, taking pandemic qualities into account for reviews like that. You know, the other simpler part is nobody wants to be that guy right now complaining that the soup isn't as hot as it should be. We don't want to be the people who are kicking restaurateurs and kicking restaurants while they're down. Now, having said that, I am going to say that it's not our job to make sure that we're not PR company. We're not a PR company for restaurants either. It's not our job to keep them in business. It's their job to keep themselves in business. And we have been the people who are commenting on how that business is being done. Well, right now it's not business as usual for anybody, so it can't be business as usual for us.
Absolutely. And I think that you explained that really, really nicely. The two key parts for me that just really made it impossible for us to go back to the business as usual of restaurant reviews is the judging them on what that chef or cook is trying to do, and the comparative to other restaurants. It would just be a year of all asterisks. And then what do you do when that year is over? Do you go back and re-review them immediately once they're open and fully able to realize their intention? It just seemed unwieldy and unmanageable. And yeah, it would make us look like jerks. Prior to the pandemic, I mean, our operating principle for reviews had been, if they're open and they are taking people's money, they are opening themselves up to having an opinion made about them by a critic. And they are open and they are taking people's money, but they are having to do so with so many compromises and so many alterations just to survive of how that business is being run that, yeah, we just did not feel comfortable going back to that review model.
Yeah, and I'm Mike Sutter, and I approve this message. That you kind of, I love that you brought up the asterisk, because you get into a baseball metaphor real quick, where what do the records mean when they all have that qualifying aspect to them? And until we can apply the same sort of rules across the board that we applied in the past to achieve this database of hundreds and hundreds of restaurants compared against each other and compared against the kind of standards that we set for restaurants, I don't think we should be doing them in that same fashion. Certainly what we've been doing since then is to do what I call, and what I think we've agreed on, is show and tell. Here's a new place that's open. Here's the food they're doing it. Here are photos of it. Here are descriptions of it. Then we've also been doing, in lieu of restaurant reviews, we've been doing groups of food. Certainly it started out being comfort food like macaroni and cheese and chicken fried steak and fried chicken, and the things that make us feel better and make us feel like we're a part of the world again. I think those are both two useful ways to still have restaurant commentary without veering over into the sharper edges of criticism.
And the commentary there is that these are places that you feel comfortable recommending. I mean, you're actually doing the legwork for people to recommend 5 great sandwiches or 5 great chicken fried steaks.
Yeah, not everybody's making the cut. I've been to too many places where there just wasn't enough going on positive that I would feel good recommending people go there right now. That doesn't mean that I went the opposite way and advise people not to go near this place. So that's kind of the medium that we are trying to strike.
Well said, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paul, in terms of how the pandemic has shaped some of our coverage, you do most of the cooking centerpieces. You come up with a lot of your own recipes, and we had a lot of plans for Easter and for a lot of kind of spring cooking ideas, and that all got kind of thrown to hell when the pandemic hit, and suddenly people were cooking at home very differently. You know, people were having to be more thrifty with their ingredients because maybe they didn't have a job, or suddenly they're having to cook all of their meals for their kids who are not in school or going to daycare. And how do you make meals that are, that are going to satisfy your children without them screaming at you? Talk about some of the ways in which some of the stories that you were able to write, kind of focusing on those changes of how people were cooking.
First and foremost, let's not remember how freaking nuts it was at the beginning.
Oh, the shortages.
I mean, there was a moment when, and like I'm doing this as a professional recipe developer, trying to find ingredients to earn my paycheck. I go into the grocery store and I've just got to figure out what to do with a package of turkey necks, some stale artichokes, and a bottle of clamato juice. I was looking in my ability to just do my basic job. And this went on for a good 2-3 weeks until a lot of restaurants stepped up and started transforming themselves into retail stores using their like Cisco and other suppliers. But that put people in an equally weird position where, sure, we'll sell you ground beef, but you've got to buy this 20-pound chub, and good luck, deal with it. Because they were dealing with the sort of bulk portions that restaurants were. So, and once that first couple of weeks got out of the way, people were cooking, some people for the first time. So what we were doing was a lot of really basic elemental recipes that could be made with ingredients that you were likely to find. At that point, a lot of the stores had started getting chicken breasts back in stock. Now, these weren't the premium chicken breasts. These were the giant monster chicken breasts that weigh about 4 pounds a piece, which is not normal, folks. That shouldn't happen. But eventually it kind of smoothed out, and everybody got over that mindset that, give it a couple weeks and we'll be back to normal. And ingredients start showing up on the shelves. People realize they're going to be working from home. And that's when folks got super ambitious. What are you going to do? You're locked down in your house. You've got time on your hands. You might not be working. So we spoke with a lot of people who really undertook seriously big projects, like learning how to make the laminated dough for croissants in that kind of traditional French style, where you're folding and folding and folding and stick it in the fridge and doing the whole thing over again. And it's like 3-day process. And we've had some folks who pushed themselves in really fun ways. I think specifically of Todd Slack, who he's a longtime food and beverage dude here in town, who decided that he was going to cook his way through Ina Garten's over of cookbooks. She's got 11, I think 12 now, and he's just started cooking on the 12th one as well. But it was basically 8-10 recipes a day from these books over the course of 2 or 3 months. So it's now we're kind of getting to the point where the grocery experience, like when you go into a store, other than the fact that you're putting the mask on and hand sanitizing and distancing, you can stock and shop the way you normally would. And for the most part, the biggest thing impacting the way I do what I do now is simply the fact that we're not cooking for gatherings. We felt this in Easter. We're going to see it again coming up in Thanksgiving. A recipe that serves a table of 12 to 14 is not a thing that'll happen this year. We are going to have smaller gatherings. Nobody needs a 22-pound turkey like they had in the past. So it's the challenge is on us to find a way to give people the flavors that they expect, but in portions and sizes that make sense for what our families are dealing with this holiday season.
Yeah, we still haven't decided exactly how we're going to do that. So, but we'll come up with something. We'll see how we get through Thanksgiving and Christmas this year. But now, Chuck, unlike Mike and Paul, man, your column is pretty pandemic proof. I mean, people gonna grill, like grillers gonna grill. You're not gonna be able to stop people from putting meat and other foodstuffs onto fire. Why is that?
Yeah, I'm your guy to surviving a zombie apocalypse. We're gonna get you through this. I look at it in a few ways. Well, for one, just being in South Texas, the brilliance of the climate and the environment, we are allowed to grill year long. And I'm one of those guys that always looks at our electric bill, every month and just like, why did we spend so much? Well, let's get the heat out of the house, and so the air conditioner doesn't work so hard. And I am taking that food outside and cooking it out there. That's the most obvious reason for me. The second reason, though, is like you would playing a round of golf on the weekend or whatever your hobby might be, grilling and smoking outside is a hobby on its own. That is something where so many people, they're spending all week preparing on what they're going to cook on the weekend. And there's a camaraderie with it where whether I'm going as basic as burgers or I'm smoking ribs or brisket or something like that, when you are the person that makes that food, you just sit there and at the corner of your eye, you look at everybody take that first bite, and you want to see what their reaction is. And if they're like, hey, thumbs up, great stuff. There's just a point of pride to that. And thirdly, the access to various grilling and smoking contraptions has made it easier than ever before to be able to make really good food outside. We've got a litany of different types of charcoals that are infused with garlic or mesquite. Pellet grills have gotten to be really popular, where they look like rabbit food. These tiny little wood pellets burn, and you can almost set it up like an oven, and it adds a woody, smoky flavor to your meat. And you set it, and you forget it like you would in an oven. It's just really accessible, and people are discovering all sorts of things. It's like you can cook breakfast, you can cook sandwiches, you can cure your own meats, you can make bacon, you can sizzle a hot steak, you can make blueberry and blackberry cobblers outside.
I think you've covered all of these almost at some point in your column.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and it just never. It's a never-ending well, and more of these contraptions keep showing up. Pit smokers, your backyard Weber grill. I mean, it's just it's really one of those things where I do kind of equate it towards, where you're keeping up to the Joneses with golf, where you always had to have that fancy new set of golf clubs or things like that. Grilling is a hobby now. Smoking is a hobby, and it's one of those things where it's just, that is where your attention is being put forward to. And I can't think of a more, fruitful pursuit than doing that. I mean, there's no losers in cooking great food, right? Outside.
Yeah. And I think that at least earlier during the pandemic, and to some extent now, but people were really looking for things to do. I mean, that's why you had people like Todd Slack who were challenging themselves to cook through all of Ina Garten's cookbooks. And people were probably drawn to trying smoking and grilling for the first time. Like suddenly they had the 12 hours to cook a brisket overnight. Now, Mike, continuing on the sort of pandemic theme and what's changed, there's been a huge impact, obviously, in what the pandemic has done to restaurants and to bars and what they're having to do to survive. What are some of the trends that you see, some of the changes that you see in that dining scene that are going to be with us for a while going forward?
One of the people stories that I like to talk about was Alma Martinez over at Angel's Mexican Haven. I was in her restaurant the day the governor announced that restaurants could go back to 75% capacity. So I talked to Alma about it, and Alma said, "That's great. I have enough business to go up to 75%. I don't know that I have the room to go up to 75% with social distancing, but I will not go back to 100% no matter what." She said, "I think the way that we were eating before, we were all too close together, given how much we are disease vectors, even without a pandemic." And I thought, well, that's going to be an eye-opening moment for a lot of people. But on the day-to-day level for restaurants right now, what we're looking at is, first off, some technology changes. And I like what Emily Williams-Knight, who's the CEO of the Texas Restaurant Association, said. She said, technology is no longer a nicety, it's a necessity. And these are things like putting QR codes on the tables or at the ordering counters so that you can just point your phone at them and they will kick up a digital menu. That goes to the idea that restaurants should no longer have the kinds of menus where you're touching them, leaving your prints and your germs on laminated menus. So this reduces the cost of having daily printed menus on paper, and it possibly makes it easier for customers who, most of them, are going to have phones to begin with anyway, and maybe would like to interact with it that way to begin with. I think that's a change that is going to hang on. And if you're going to get a tattoo these days, an ironic 2020 tattoo, go ahead and get a QR code. Personalize it, get it to your website, so when people point at it, they'll get to all of your information the same way we're doing it at restaurants. I think another thing that people are doing is cutting back on their staffing. Now, the beauty of this is that some of that is entirely necessary right now because restaurants are having a hard time getting people back into their jobs after having had to furlough them, which is the nicest word ever for firing and laying off, no matter the circumstance. But they're having trouble getting people back. So measures that are taken to reduce the amount of staffing that a restaurant will need to stay successful in running is something you're going to see, I believe, pushing into the future. Now, those are things like ordering at the counter so that you don't have the back and forth of a waiter coming to your table to bring the menu, to come back, to say, how's it going? Let me make some recommendations. You do all that up front, even if they bring that to, even if then it becomes table service after that. Think of all the back and forth that you've eliminated by ordering and paying at a counter before you go to sit down. That's something that's going to live with us going into the future. I think another thing we're going to see is spaces that are designed to have more flexibility of space. You're going to have more outdoor seating because the idea is that people are more comfortable sitting outside with the idea that the virus doesn't transmit as quickly or as virulently outside as it does inside. You're going to be seeing more of that. I also think that
but also important to point out there is that in Texas, there have been occupancy caps placed for indoor dining. There have not been any placed for outdoor dining. They expect you to still maintain a social distance, but there is not a percentage occupancy that you've got to maintain outside. So business-wise, it's an advantage to have more outdoor space for that too.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that brings up a story. I've been, and I don't know if this is, I've thought about whether I should tell people this or not. Since the pandemic started, I've been to 200 restaurants. Actually showed up, whether it was to pick up curbside, to get takeout, or to actually go and sit down at the restaurant. Increasingly now, it's all sit down time. I've got a really good, comfortable mask, and I wear that all the time. It's almost like taking it off in between chewing. Put on your mask for inhaling or remove it for exhaling, whatever. I even had some smart aleck email me about that, about what the rules were. Did you have to take it off to chew and then put it back on when you were done swallowing?
Yeah, Mike, I definitely want to hear more about some of the trends, but we're starting to run out of time a little bit. So people who want to learn more about some of the upcoming changes, the long-term changes that they can expect to see in dining, need look no further than our Sunday A1 section in the Express News. This Sunday, all of these trends that Mike talked about and even more and more detail is going to be a story that you have. And Paul, also coming up, another A1 story for next week. Talk a little bit about some of the changes. In one of the changes that we've really seen, which is totally counterintuitive based on everything that Mike just said, so many damn restaurant openings. We're running out of room in our food flashes in print to run all of the announcements of all of the new restaurants that have decided to open. What are they thinking? Why are they opening now?
It is overwhelming. We've reported on more than 24 places that I have either announced or opened in the past couple of months. And that's just the ones that we're able to keep tabs on. The industry churns on, as it always will. But some of those things that Mike was just mentioning, the folks who are opening are people who are embracing technology. So the QR code thing, I've seen that at a handful of places. Any sort of system that minimizes the interactions between customers and the staff. So what we've got is a place called the Dooryard. I spoke with Jason Meredith, who's opening that, and it's a restaurant and a bar, but the whole system it's contactless from point to point. So they do the QR code thing. They have a wall of pull taps for beer, and they made a real point that they're not using. I know bars love to show off all the cool the bar taps for the beers they've got. This place, it's all sleek stainless steel that they can sanitize in a split, and they're putting these little tap hats on each one, so a person grabs a little tap hat, pulls their beer, and then throws it away. And it's a self-serve model. You pay for what you drink, They're doing the same thing with the food that they're offering. They had to offer food to open because a straight up bar was not able to operate.
Yeah.
They changed their model to incorporate food as well. And
But
that's
why is that important? I mean, why is that a reason to open?
right now, as much as anything, the customer is only comfortable with certain things. The way the money moves, that sort of idea of a traditional blue plate diner kind of place where you get comfort food at a cheap price, that's not what's thriving right now. There's a reason Luby's, the whole family, went under. So what we're seeing is places that understand we're all stressed out. We're all eating our feelings, but we want to do it in a way that gives us a reason to go out. I spoke with a guy who just opened a place called the Hayden, and he made it very clear that he's going to serve meatloaf, but his meatloaf is going to kick your meatloaf's ass so that you feel the need to go out and buy it. It's comfort, it's location, it's the right real estate deal.
And speaking of real estate deal, I think in your story, which full disclosure, I've read a couple of times at this point now, one of the interesting points that your story makes is that right now there are so many more real estate deals, and there are so many, I guess the way that the leases are being written allows people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have been able to open up a restaurant, they're able to afford to do so now.
There was a real sweet spot through the summer up until about a month ago where we're grinding into the COVID, and you need to make money one way or another. Whether you're a landlord or a restaurateur, you need money coming in. So I did speak with a number of people who, whether it was rent abatements where they were getting a longer period of time where they did not have to actively pay rent, or cherry deals on the percentages and the rent rates themselves, whatever it is, there was a moment. Now, many of those have been snatched up, according to some of the folks that I've spoken to in the industry, the real estate industry. But it's like, if you've got your hawk's eye looking, you can still find it. You just got to be ready to act on it right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And again, that is a story that is going to be out in print. It'll be online early next week, and in print, we don't know exactly when, but sometime next week in the Express News, also on page A1. And now I would like to switch over to some questions from the audience. This is going back to something that you mentioned earlier in this happy hour, Chuck, and that's your hatred of pancakes. This person would like to know, who hurt you?
Well, my stomach hurt me, and that I've never felt good after eating pancakes. It's like your entire day is ruined at 11 a.m. Who wants that? Who wants that?
All right. And for Mike, how often do restaurants get this order right for you? Which I'm curious about too, because you're kind of going out of your way to be extra fussy to test the restaurants. So how often do they pass?
Well, it's almost like chasing the MacGuffin. It's not necessarily real. As long as they get it somewhere that's pleasant for me, then I'm satisfied with it. And I mischaracterized it earlier. It's not mid-rare, it's rare plus. Rare plus, which just even sounds more pretentious, even if that's possible. But
agreed, it sounds more pretentious, and apparently, yes, that's possible.
Hey, yes, it is. A good steakhouse is going to do whatever they can to hit the exact temperature that you're looking for. And maybe it's just a way of saying, yeah, these are one of the good guys.
Okay. This is a question I think that can be answered by anybody. What about the pandemic's impact on minority-owned businesses who use their culinary and business skills to change the social trajectory of their entire family? How many of these minority-owned businesses do we see still hanging in there?
I would say quite a few. I'd say a lot of the family-owned businesses tend to they'll keep shorter hours, to where it might be like a 7 to 2, or an earlier window of service to where you're not having to take care of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I've actually, especially on the barbecue front, I've seen quite a few of those businesses still doing quite well. But I'd have to defer, more to Mike on that. But just
Oh
from
yeah,
my,
and I'll tell you, like for example, Mr. and Mrs. G's Home Cooking just reopened after having gone dark for 6 months. I love what they did over at Mrs. Kitchen, which is another soul food restaurant. When I was doing a fried chicken and macaroni and cheese roundup, which, hey, have I got the best job or what? They converted to a drive-through model only. But this is like an old cottage house, so it's not a drive. They don't have a drive-through. So what you do is you wheel your car past the front porch, and people up on the front porch holler down at you, and you make the exchange like that. And then you drive around to the back of the house and they bring your food out to you. But man, they were blocking traffic as to how popular they were. Tell me there's not a pent-up demand for that.
Absolutely. And we just found out earlier today that the Jerk Shack, for example, which during the pandemic was able to open up a food stall at the Pearl Food Hall, the bottling department has announced that they're going to be opening up their second location of the original Jerk Shack on the far northwest side over off of 151. We also have a Cambodian restaurant, I think for maybe the first time in San Antonio, that is soon to open. Golden Watt Noodle House. Is that right, Mike?
You are.
Golden Watt Noodle House out of the Cookhouse, which is going to be opening up. So there, and of course in San Antonio, we're a majority city with literally a taqueria or taco truck on every corner. And we know those are still going strong. I mean, every time I drive past Fredericksburg, the original donut house, they have basically their own lane on Fredericksburg. I don't know if you've driven past there for all the overflow from their drive-through. So I think that it's obviously the pandemic has had a really damaging effect for restaurants across the board. I think you quoted from the TRA, the Texas Restaurant Association, 15% of Texas restaurants lost in September. San Antonio is a city that is still predominantly small family business owned restaurants or big massive chains. And so we've seen some closures, but it doesn't seem to be, at least from the closures that we know of, to be affecting disproportionately any one minority group over another. So that seems to be a kind of flat reckoning across the board. There's another question here, but is there any talk of a wine column or covering more microbreweries? I think that we will absolutely cover more microbreweries as they open, which is not something that we've seen during the pandemic. And all of the openings, we haven't seen a microbrewery. There's a lot more restrictions still in place for bars than there have been for restaurants. A wine column is something that we used to have, and personally, as a lover of wine, I would love to bring back. But unfortunately, it just doesn't do well for us online. There does not seem to be much reader interest in drinking. Let me rephrase. There apparently seems to be a lot of reader interest in drinking. People drink. There doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in reading about it. I should clarify. So when we've done surveys and looked at our data online, that just doesn't seem to be a thing that resonates in this market, which is sad because we are literally in the backyard of one of the nation's largest wine growing regions. And I think we're the second or third overall. Like, I think we're just behind California. And with all the wildfires, I'm sad to say we might actually surpass them sooner than we would like to. Excuse me. But yeah, they're just, if you can manage to fire up a bunch of people interested in reading more about it, I would love to be able to bring that back. Okay, I'm gonna wait for a few more questions from readers, but in the meantime, Mike and Chuck, going to our 52 weeks series, which started off with 365 days, and we quickly realized that that could not continue at that pace. So we changed it to 52 weeks. You guys have done tacos, obviously, burgers, you're now doing pizza, you've done barbecue. What can we expect in 2021? Why don't you announce it to people what our 52 weeks is going to be next year?
Chuck, I'm going to cede that one to you, bud.
Well, I think you know, it's been such a fixture in San Antonio for years. We are going to canvass the city and we want to find out who the best food trucks are.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
So
And there was much
we're-
rejoicing.
Yeah, 52 weeks of food trucks. And what that's going to allow us to do is, obviously, you know, because of the pandemic, food trucks are all over the place. And, you know, we can hit on all sorts of different culinary types. There's barbecue food trucks. There's Mexican food trucks. There's any, you know, dessert food trucks, pizza food trucks, anything you
Filipino
can,
food trucks.
yeah, Filipino, and there's just about everything that you can imagine, and so that's going to allow us to really have a really large canvas. And when we find that food truck that, you know, this is one you got to find. You know, obviously you got to follow the road, you know, because they're not in one place. But I think it's something that I'm really excited for personally, and I think we're going to identify some winners. Now the question is. Can we find 52 food trucks? And the answer is yes. There's a lot. You go up and down any street, and you're bound to find 3 or 4. And then, of course, San Antonio's blessed to have a bunch of food truck parks, things like that. This is going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it.
I think we could do 52 weeks of just taco trucks, honestly, in San Antonio.
Probably,
yeah. But we're going to expand beyond that. Now, Chuck, you better behave, because one reader I saw on chat here, my little bubble popped up. Someone has suggested, and I just may go through with this. If you're naughty, before the end of this year, we're going to do 52 weeks of pancakes.
No. No.
You better behave. Behave.
I would rather do 52 weeks of liver and onions.
Hey, Chuck, now it's clear to me why when I suggested to you, hey, Chuck, what if we did 52 weeks of breakfast?
He's like, oh, hell no.
No.
That's the year that suddenly Paul gets involved in 52 weeks. Okay, Paul, a question for you. What makes this food section in San Antonio different, or is it different than what you can find like at a New York Times or the Washington Post?
You know, the thing that's really unique about us, especially in the newspaper industry, is we have hyper-local coverage that is tailored to a San Antonio audience, and we have the muscle to do it in a way that is nuanced and detailed. Very few newspaper food staffs in the country, unless you are a juggernaut like a New York Times or an LA Times or Washington Post, have the amount of just human input to create stories with the wide range of expertise that we have. All of us write about food, but we do it in very, very different ways. And we're able to drill down and really focus on just every little detail of the scene in a way that very few communities can, because newspapers don't have the muscle.
And I think for the past 2 years, we've made a very concerted effort also to really have a sense of place and be much more representative of the food of this region and of the cultures in San Antonio. San Antonio, 3 years ago, was it at this point, was made a UNESCO City of Gastronomy, the second in the nation after Tucson. And the reason that we were selected to be a City of Gastronomy was specifically for the confluence of food cultures that we have here in our history, the German, the American Indian, obviously the Mexican, and how those food cultures have over, centuries evolved, played well together or reacted to each other, and continue to evolve to this day. And we've really, I think, made it our mission, Paul, especially with what you do with our cooking, to really represent those foodways that are very specific to this area.
We have a huge pantry of really interesting native ingredients and techniques and traditions. And if you're reading your standard national food magazine or whatever it may be, you're not getting something that's custom to your reality in your community. You're getting something that fits a general audience and it'll make everybody happy because it'll give you 13 variations on hamburgers. But if you really want to know what a mesquite bean is, we're surrounded by mesquite trees, but if you want to know what it is and the fact that you can use it in your kitchen, you're not going to find that at any sort of food publication.
Yeah.
unless it's people like us who can dedicate the time and energy to do it.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Now, Chuck, you clearly have a love for all things Texas barbecue, but as you mentioned, you're from Iowa. So how the
Yeah.
hell do you go from Iowa to what you do here with your love of smoke and brisket and all things Texas? How did you fall in love with that?
I've said this story before, but yeah, when I was in high
Yeah,
school,
I know. That's why I'm asking, because it's a charming story.
yeah, I used to work. When I was in high school, one of my jobs was to clear out the meat case for expired meat, and there was always this gigantic cut in the corner, and it was like $15 for like 10 pounds, and I still remember the butcher's name. It was Dave Kramer, and I said, Dave, why is nobody buying this giant hunk of meat? It's a great value. He goes, well, nobody knows how to cook it. And so I always had to throw it out every single week. Threw out this giant piece of meat, and it was brisket. So I'd never eaten it. I didn't even know what the heck a brisket was. And moved down to Texas many years later. Went tubing in New Braunfels with my wife on the Comal River after we got done. She goes, we're going to go eat barbecue. And I'm like, oh, yeah, let's go do it. And she goes, we're going to order a pound of lean brisket and a pound of fatty brisket. And I like, well, but that's the stuff I used to throw out all the time. Well, all right, I'll eat it. And he goes, yeah, it's a big Texas thing. And put it on a piece of white bread, put the strips of brisket on there, a little barbecue sauce, ate it, just bang. It was like greatest thing I'd ever had. It was amazing. And that really kicked it off. And then after that was, she liked me enough to stay with me for Christmas. She didn't break up with me before the holidays. And then she bought me a smoker, just a real simple electric smoker that you plug in, put your wood chunks in, and it went from there. I started cooking ribs. I started cooking everything I could imagine. And then now I am up to, I believe I have 8 or 9 cooking devices outdoors, between smokers, pits, barrels, grills, all that stuff, to now where there's, there almost needs to be some sort of intervention if I ever buy another cooking device. But the beauty of that is that that's what I get to experiment on to distribute all these great fun recipes and techniques, to the readers at the taste section. So it's been a lot of fun.
Intervention, you mean marriage counseling because your wife, Debbie, cannot handle more? That I would believe.
Yeah, that's possible. The one that got me in the most hot water was I bought a $600 grill in December. And, she's like, oh, so you're buying your own Christmas presents now? And I'm like, I had no defense. She wasn't very happy about that, but hey, it's a heck of a cooker.
All right. Well, on that note, it's a heck of a cooker. I want to say good night to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this, our first debut episode of Grill the Taste Team. We expect to have several more of these coming up in the future, so stay tuned. This is one of the special subscriber exclusives that you get by subscribing to the San Antonio Express News. Thank you so much for being subscribers. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you.